On 5th March 1936, Chief Test Pilot Mutt Summers taxied the prototype K5054 to the runway and lifted off for an 8-minute maiden flight. The result was breathtaking. A sleek single-seat monoplane with thin elliptical wings designed by Beverly Shenstone and a powerful Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. Mitchell's Spitfire had 8.303 Browning machine guns in the wings, a retractable undercarriage, and a glass cockpit. Innovations that made it a poem of speed and precision, as one aviation writer later put it. Tragically, Mitchell did not live to see war. He died of cancer in 1937, and his longtime colleague, Joseph Smith, took over as chief designer. But the aircraft that Mitchell dreamed of was ready for the fight. By August 1938, the first Spitfire Mark I fighters began to join the RAF. No. 19 Squadron at RAF Duxford received the first production Spitfires in August 1938, and Britain set about dramatically scaling up production. Factories at Woolston and the new Castle Bromwich Shadow Works churned out airframes, ultimately well over 20,000 in all. As war clouds gathered after 1939, those shiny new fighters became Britain's most precious aerial asset. The pre-war Spitfire was already a potent symbol in Britain's imagination, a sleek arrow of defiance against the Reich's fast planes. Even in peacetime, its clear-weather flights were headline news. On a RAF press day in May 1939, the Flight magazine editor described seeing a Spitfire in flight as witnessing poetry in motion. When World War II broke out in September 1939, the Spitfire was still outnumbered by the older Hawker Hurricane, but its unique qualities gave pilots confidence. The Spitfire was built to win dogfights. Its Merlin engine and clean aerodynamics gave it a higher top speed and better climb than most German fighters. It could turn inside the Messerschmitt Bf 109 in the classic horizontal fight. Joseph Smith and his team at Supermarine continued refining the design even as the war started, producing new variants with more power and heavier armament. But in mid-1940, Britain faced its first great test, and it began on the beaches of France. In May 1940, with the Wehrmacht's blitzkrieg tearing through Western Europe, the British Expeditionary Force was cornered at Dunkirk. The RAF scrambled every available fighter to cover the evacuation. Spitfires from Duxford, Hornchurch and other airfields poured over the English Channel, each carrying barely 40 minutes of fuel to reach Dunkirk's burning shores. On 26 May, Squadron Leader G.R. Raz Stevenson led 3 No. 19 Squadron Spitfires into battle against Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers terrorizing the beaches. In a bold move, he throttled his planes back to only 130 miles per hour, drawing up behind the relaxed Stuka formation. The Germans never saw it coming, and within seconds, Stevenson's section unleashed a burst that shredded 3 Stukas out of the sky. It was the Spitfire's first victory in anger, but the cost was steep. Stevenson himself was shot down and forced to land on the sand. His wingman, Watty Watson, hit by cannon fire, went into the sea and was lost. By the time the beaches were cleared, Fighter Command had given up 106 of its fighters and 80 pilots. These losses were tragic, yet the Dunkirk scrambles taught vital lessons. It was the RAF's first taste of combat against the Luftwaffe's Me-109 fighters, experience that, as Air Vice Marshal Keith Park noted, would help British pilots learn to spoil the aim of German planes, rather than heroically chase every kill. The survivors of Dunkirk brought home valuable tactics and hard-earned resolve. Returning from Dunkirk, Dowding's Fighter Command braced for the battle that would decide the air war over Britain. From July to October 1940, the skies above southeast England became a cauldron of combat. The Spitfire flew at the point of the RAF defence. Based on famous airfields like Biggin Hill and Kenley in Kent, or Northolt and Hornchurch outside London, Spitfire squadrons scrambled daily against waves of Heinkel bombers and escorting Me-109s. By mid-August, Biggin Hill itself had become a Spitfire station, hosting number 92, 72, 74 and 610 squadrons, bristling with Spitfires ready to launch into battle. RAF Duxford and other airfields hosted similar Spitfire units, in fact number. 19 Squadron at Duxford had been the first to train on Spitfires back in 1938, so it was fitting that they formed part of the front line. In one notorious week in August 1940, the Luftwaffe sent hundreds of bombers against London. Spitfire pilots of the so-called Big Wing scrambled from Duxford and nearby Foulmere in waves of 50 to 60 aircraft, a sight that one pilot said gave terrific confidence to everyone in formation. The battle was brutal. Hurricanes, being easier to fly, took on the German bombers head-on, while Spitfires tangled with the Me-109 fighters that screened them. Hurricanes flew more sorties overall, but it was the Spitfire that won hearts and headlines. Despite their small numbers, Spitfire pilots fought tooth and nail. By the end of the 11-week battle, they had shot down roughly 529 enemy aircraft, at a cost of 230 Spitfires lost. Their kill-to-loss ratio was higher than the Hurricanes. In many combats, the Spitfire's superior speed and agility gave it the edge against the Luftwaffe's single-wing Bf 109 E-Series fighters. Fighter Command's experimental Dowding system of radar interception, orchestrated by Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding and Group Captain Paddy Heffernan on the ground, placed Spitfire groups into the right place at the right time, but it was 11 Groups Commander Air Vice Marshal Keith Park who bore the brunt of the offensive's weight on his small sector. His ordnance room at RAF Uxbridge became as critical as the cockpits of the Spitfires streaking overhead. Pilots remember the Battle of Britain as a time of sheer exhaustion and exhilaration. Many were very young, barely out of flight school, yet by the end, some had dozens of kills. Douglas Bader, the legendary double amputee, led 242 Squadron, flying the new Spitfire Mkaya and Earby from Kenley. Squadron leader Sailor. Milan, one of 92 Squadron's wing leaders, scored 23 victories. Americans like Bob Stanford Tuck and Canadians like Johnny Johnson, who later became the Western Allies' top scoring ace, flew Spitfires as well. Even factory test pilots got into the fight. At Hornchurch in mid-August 1940, the Vickers test pilot Geoffrey Quill was seconded to 65 Squadron. In just 19 days, Quill scored a Bf 109 and shared a He-11-1 kill before being recalled to continue testing. By October 1940, though deeply battered, the RAF had gained air supremacy. Hitler's plan to invade Britain, Operation Sea Lion, was shelved. As the Spitfires regrouped on their home fields, Biggin Hill, Tangmere, West Hampnet, Duxford, and dozens more, newspapers proclaimed the fighter saviour of England, and the nation took pride in the little green fighters that had secured its skies. Victory in the Battle of Britain did not end the Spitfire's career. It only began it. From 1941 on, Spitfires ranged far beyond Britain's shores. Hurricanes had done much of the work in the dark days, but now the Spitfire has become the RAF's premier fighter everywhere it was needed. In the Mediterranean and North Africa, Spitfires based at Malta, Gibraltar, and forward desert airfields challenged Axis air power. In December 1941, when Japan entered the war, Spitfires even turned their noses toward Asia and flew combat in India and Burma. On Malta in 1942, the Supermarine fighters played a legendary role. The tiny island was under siege by Axis air forces, and its veteran pilots begged for Spitfires. By early 1942, Malta's defence comprised mostly aging Hurricanes, which the pilots found no match for the Luftwaffe's Me-10-9s. In March 1942, Operation Spotter delivered 16 new Spitfire Mark V fighters to Malta aboard HMS Eagle. For a brief, desperate period in April 1942, only one Spitfire was serviceable on the island, as constant bombing wrecked both planes and airfields. With grim determination, the RAF kept sending reinforcements by carrier convoys. On 9th May, the carriers Wasp and Eagle unloaded 64 more Spitfires, Operation Bowery, giving Malta 5 full Spitfire squadrons at once. The effect was dramatic. The Italians announced 37 planes lost on the first day of Bowery, and the Axis bomber crews in Sicily soon found themselves running out of air cover in Malta's skies. The Hurricanes on Malta could now concentrate on the dive bombers, while the Spitfires took the fight to the Me-109s at high altitude. Among the heroes of Malta was Canadian pilot George Buzz Burling, who became known as the Falcon of Malta for his astonishing tally of 27 enemy aircraft shot down in just 2 weeks. In the end, the Spitfires helped blunt the Luftwaffe's onslaught. By October 1942, the Axis realized the island could not be conquered by air. When they finally attempted a major bombing raid in late October, the defenders, bolstered by over 160 Spitfires on hand, pounded the attackers into retreat. The victory at Malta, aided by resupplying convoys, proved a turning point in the Mediterranean, allowing the Allied forces eventually to break through in North Africa. Throughout this period, the Spitfire continued to improve. Every few months brought a new mark to meet a new threat. Early war Mark I and II Spitfires had 8 machine guns, giving a high rate of fire. The Mark V of 1941 upgraded to heavier armament, 220mm Hispano cannons and 4.303 guns, and a more powerful Merlin 45 engine. When the Luftwaffe introduced the new Focke-Wulf FW 190 in 1941, Britain scrambled a stopgap. The Mark IX with a 2-stage Merlin built around the existing airframe pressed into service in 1942, restoring parity with the FW 190. By 1943, supercharged Merlin engines and longer, tapered wingtips gave the Mark VIII and Mark XIV breakneck speed. The Griffon-powered Mk Fortunf, first flown in 1943, packed 2,050 horsepower and could exceed 400 miles per hour, far outpacing anything German airmen had left. Even the basic Spitfire airframe, so clean and strong, lent itself to specialized roles. Some Spitfires were fitted with cameras instead of guns for photo reconnaissance. Others carried bombs or drop tanks for fighter-bomber missions. Britain even developed a naval Spitfire, the Seafire, with modifications for carrier deck landings. By the end of the war, the Spitfire had gone through over 20 major marks and countless sub-variants. In all, about 22,000 were produced, an extraordinary number for a fighter that started in 1936. Its continuous evolution kept it at the cutting edge of aerial combat from 1940 through 1945. Beyond engines and wings, the Spitfire's legacy lives in the human stories woven through its history. Its designer, Reginald Mitchell, became a wartime legend, so much so that a 1942 film, the first of the few, starring Leslie Howard, dramatized his role. Its test pilots, from Summers on the first flight to Geoffrey Quill, who succeeded him, formed a unique breed. Quill famously test flew every mark of the Spitfire and even volunteered to fly combat in August 1940. In just 19 days, with 65 Squadron, he shot down one Bf-109 and shared a Heinkel bomber, then immediately returned to further refine the Spitfire's design. On the battlefield, fighter pilots formed a brotherhood around the Spitfire's cockpits. Number. 616 Squadron, for example, was the first unit to try the new Griffon engine and joked that the bigger bite at takeoff chomped their headrest off. But soon that raw power became a trusted ally in combat. Wing Commander Douglas Bader, despite his wooden legs, and Group Captain Adolf Saylor. Milan were among many who helped train others in the art of dogfighting in Spitfires. At Tangmere, Bader famously led an all-Spitfire wing and helped turn it into one of Fighter Command's finest. Pilots like George Unwin, Grumpy, pilots shot down and returned to fight again, or ones like Burling who seemed superhuman. Their names became wartime household words because of the Spitfire. Ground crew and factory workers also poured their pride into the plane. Women in Lockheed gloves lacquering rudders in Birmingham, mechanics in blustery control towers waving pilots off, knowing that each Spitfire carried a life inside it. By war's end, the Spitfire had cemented its place in British law. It wasn't just a tool of war, but a symbol of national spirit. Posters, headlines and radio broadcasts celebrated those Spitfires up there, and every child who saw one in the sky could feel hope. Prime Minister Winston Churchill himself acknowledged Fighter Command's achievement. Though he famously only mentioned the pilots, it was understood that they meant the airplanes too. After victory, the Spitfire's fame only grew. It flew with Allied forces across Europe, the Mediterranean, even in the Pacific and the jungles of Asia. When peace came, it was the only British fighter to have served continuously from start to finish, to the thwart of the war. Today, long after those skies of smoke and fire have cleared, a handful of Spitfires still fly. Of the tens of thousands built, roughly 60 remain airworthy as of 2025, cruising overhead at air shows or in flypasts. Each carry the scars and stories of 1940s combat, bullet holes patched in the wings, names stenciled on fuselages in faded paint, the memory of every pilot who ever climbed aboard. At Duxford or Biggin Hill museums, you can see them parked where once Hurricane squadrons stood, proud reminders of a bygone age. In that sense, the Spitfire is more than an airplane. It's the echo of never was so much owed by so many to so few, a silhouette of determination against the sky. From its birth in Mitchell's drawing office to its last combat over Europe, the Spitfire remained Britain's flying legend, technical marvel and emblem of hope, woven forever into the story of World War II.